The storm came down like the sky had cracked open, and the man in the cheap rain slicker stood in the middle of the parking lot, waving a flashlight at 20 headlights cutting through the dark. Water ran off the brim of his cap in a steady sheet. The engines idled low and patient. A wall of sound that climbed up through the soles of his boots and into his chest. He could have raised the gate arm and gone back inside the worn little booth. He could have called the road sergeant and reported the trespass and let the night take care of itself. Instead, he lifted his arm and pointed the beam toward the empty back row, where the loading dock awnings hung wide enough to keep the worst of the rain off a parked machine. He did not know yet what that small gesture would cost him. He did not know what it would buy. His name was Daniel Reyes, and he was 53 years old, and he had worked the graveyard shift at the Halverson Logistics Distribution Yard for 11 years. He was not a large man. His shoulders had narrowed with age, and his knees ached in the cold, and the uniform the company gave him hung loose because he had lost weight the year his wife got sick. He kept the booth clean. He kept a thermos of black coffee and a paperback Western, and a small radio that played old country, low enough that nobody complained. The yard sat on the industrial edge of a town that the highway had mostly forgotten, a flat, concrete acreage ringed by chain link and razor wire, lit by tall sodium lamps that turned everything the color of weak tea. Trucks came and went on a schedule. Daniel logged them. That was the job, and he did it the way he did everything, quietly and completely and without complaint. The bikes had come because of the road, and the road had closed because of the water. A culvert 2 miles east had given way under a flash flood, and the state had barricaded the eastbound lanes, and there was no shoulder wide enough and no overpass close enough for a column of riders caught out in the open. They had pulled off at the only lit lot for 6 miles. Their leader, a broad, gray-bearded man who rode at the front, had walked up to the booth with his hands open and the rain hammering his cut, and he had asked. He had not demanded. He had asked if they could wait out the worst of it against the back fence, where they would be out of the way. And Daniel had looked at the radar on his phone, at the long red smear crawling across the county, and he had thought about men sitting on machines in lightning, and he had made his choice. The gray-bearded man's name was Carl Brennan, though everyone who knew him called him Preacher, a name earned 40 years back when he had read scripture over a brother's grave, in a downpour not unlike this one, and had not stopped reading until the hole was filled. He was 61. He was heavy-set and barrel-chested and well over 6 feet, with a full iron-gray beard and a face seamed like old saddle leather. He wore a black leather cut heavy with patches, the largest a death's head rocker over the words Iron Covenant, and below it the smaller patch that read President. He had 3 heavy silver rings and a faded tattoo crawling up the side of his neck. When he spoke, his voice came out low and slow, a gravel rumble that did not need volume to carry. He thanked Daniel once, simply, and then he turned and raised one hand, and the column rolled toward the back fence in a long, disciplined line, and the headlights swung away, and the lot went quiet except for the rain. For 2 hours they waited. Daniel watched them from the booth. 20-some riders huddled under the loading awnings, sharing cigarettes, passing a thermos of their own. The rain came in waves, hard and harder, drumming on the steel roofs of the docks and sheeting off the edges in silver ropes. Lightning walked the horizon to the west, and each time it flared, the whole lot lit white, and the row of machines threw long black shadows across the wet concrete. And then the dark came back, and the only light was the buzzing sodium lamps and the small orange coals of cigarettes under the awning. One of them, A younger man walked a slow perimeter, as if checking that nothing in the yard had been disturbed by their presence, which nothing had. He moved without hurry, hands loose at his sides, pausing once to right a plastic pallet. The wind had tipped against the fence, and Daniel noticed that the small, unbidden act of setting something straight in a place that was not his. Daniel found that he was not afraid. He had expected to be afraid. He had spent his whole life being told what men like these were, and he had braced for it. And instead, he watched a group of soaked travelers wait out a storm with a kind of patience he recognized, because it was the same patience he had learned sitting beside a hospital bed, the patience of people who have stopped expecting the world to hurry on their behalf. He carried the thermos out once, halfway through, set it on a barrel under the awning with a stack of paper cups beside it, and went back to the booth without a word because it seemed like the thing to do, and because the rain was cold and coffee was coffee. Nobody thanked him out loud. But the younger man caught his eye as he turned to go and dipped his head, and that was thanks enough. Between men who understood each other, when the rain finally thinned to a drizzle and the road crew reopened a single lane, Preacher walked back to the booth. He did not say much. He set something on the narrow counter through the window. A folded square of leather, no bigger than a playing card, stamped with the same death's head mark. And, "You ever need anything," Preacher said, "you show that to anyone wearing our colors. Anywhere they will know it came from me." Daniel turned the leather over in his fingers. He did not understand yet what it was, only that it had weight beyond its size. He tried to give it back. Preacher shook his head once, and that was the end of it. The engines woke, and the column rolled out through the gate. Daniel held open, and the taillights climbed the on-ramp and were gone. Daniel slid the little leather square into his shirt pocket behind the company ID, and he finished his shift, and he drove home in the gray dawn to the empty house, and he thought no more about it. He had done a small kindness for strangers in the rain. That was all it was. That was all he ever meant it to be. The trouble started 9 days later, and it started in an office, which is where this kind of trouble always starts. The man who ran the Halverson yard was named Gregory Vance, and he was the sort of man the company liked to promote, which is to say he was good at appearing useful to people above him and indifferent to people below him. He was 44. He was lean and sharp-suited even in a warehouse, with a regimen of expensive haircuts and whitened teeth, and a watch that cost more than Daniel made in 3 months. He had transferred in from corporate 8 months prior with a mandate to cut overhead, and he had spent those 8 months finding things to cut. He drove a German sedan that he parked across 2 spaces. He spoke to the dock workers as though they were furniture. And he had a particular talent, the talent of the institutional bully everywhere, for turning his own failures into someone else's fault. The security footage from the night of the storm had sat unwatched on a server for over a week because nobody watched the footage unless something went wrong, and on the night of the storm, nothing had gone wrong. But a routine corporate audit flagged the lot's after-hours access logs, and the gate arm had cycled open at an unscheduled time, and Vance, who needed a win to show the auditors, pulled the footage himself. He watched a column of motorcycles roll into his yard. He watched his graveyard guard wave them in. He watched them sit under the company awnings for 2 hours. And in that grainy gray video, Vance did not see a man showing decency to travelers in a flood. He saw a liability. He saw a story. He could tell upward that made him look vigilant. He saw most of all an old man he could fire and book as a savings. He called Daniel into the office at the end of the next shift, 8 in the morning, when Daniel was tired and damp and wanting only to go home. Vance sat behind a desk with the footage already paused on his monitor, the frozen image of headlights in the rain. He did not offer Daniel a seat. "Care to explain this?" Vance said. "It was not a question." Daniel looked at the screen. There was a flood on the eastbound road. The state closed it. They had nowhere to wait it out. I let them stand against the back fence until the road reopened. They didn't touch anything. I logged it in the incident book. "You let an outlaw motorcycle gang occupy company property. I let some people get out of the lightning," Daniel said. His voice stayed even. He had learned a long time ago that there was no point raising it. Nobody was hurt. Nothing was damaged. The log is in the book if you want to read it. Vance leaned back. He had the look of a man enjoying himself. "You exposed this company to enormous liability. This If one of them had slipped and cracked his skull on our concrete, we would be looking at a lawsuit that ends careers. You made a unilateral decision to grant access to dangerous individuals without authorization. That is gross misconduct." "It was a thunderstorm," Daniel said. "There was no one to call at 3 in the morning. I made a judgment. It was the right one. It was the last one you'll make here." Vance slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Effective immediately, your final check will be mailed. Leave your uniform and your badge in the booth." Daniel stood there a moment. 11 years. End of foot. He thought about the thermos and the paperback and the low radio and the trucks he had logged through 10,000 nights. He thought about the medical bills still sitting in a drawer at home with their patient balances ticking. He did not beg. He had watched his wife face down something far worse than this man with far more grace, and he would not shame her memory by groveling in front of a 44-year-old in an expensive watch. He picked up the paper. He read it once. He set it back down. "All right," he said. And he walked out, and he left the uniform folded on the booth's little chair and the badge on top of it, and he kept only the things that were his, the thermos and the book and the radio. And in his shirt pocket behind the company ID he no longer needed. The small square of stamped leather rode home with him in the dark. He did not call the number on the leather. He did not know there was a number. For 3 days he sat in the quiet house and applied for jobs online, and watched the small savings he had set aside get eaten by the simple arithmetic of being alive. He filled out the forms at the kitchen table where his wife used to do the crossword, clicking through drop-down menus that asked for reason for leaving previous position, and he sat with the cursor blinking in that box for a long time each night before typing something that was true and would still ruin him. The grocery list got shorter. He turned the heat down 2 degrees, then 2 more. A man at the unemployment office, kind and overworked, looked at the words "gross misconduct" on Daniel's paperwork and grimaced and said the determination would take weeks and might not come at all. The medical debt sat in its drawer with its patient balances ticking. The bank sent its polite, threatening letters, the envelopes lined up on the counter unopened because opening them changed nothing. A man his age, fired for cause from a security post, did not have employers lining up. He felt the floor of his life tilting, the slow slide of a life that had been precarious all along and was now coming apart at the seam. On the 4th day, he took the leather square out of his shirt pocket and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time, turning it under the lamp so the stamped death's head caught the light. He had not meant it to be anything. That was the thing he kept coming back to. He had not done the favor expecting a debt. The whole point of the kindness was that it asked for nothing. To pull on a thread of obligation now, because he was desperate, felt like it would unmake the thing he had been proud of. He put the leather back in his pocket. He decided he would not use it. He decided he would find his own way out, the way he always had. But the world, it turned out, had its own ideas about debts, and so did the man named Preacher. Because here is the part Daniel did not know. On the night of the storm, the younger rider who had walked the slow perimeter of the yard was a man called Tomas Okafor, road name Switch. And Switch was the club's tactician, the one who handled what the club called its paperwork, which had nothing to do with paper. He was 34, he was lean and quick-eyed, with close-cropped hair and a wiry frame, and a habit of noticing everything. He had clocked the guard's name off the booth that night. He had clocked the kindness, too, the way men in his world were trained to clock the rare thing. And 9 days later, when Switch ran his routine sweep of the local news and public filings for the towns the club passed through, the way he always did, a small item surfaced in a regional labor board database. A wrongful termination inquiry, filed and quietly dropped for lack of representation. The complainant's name was Daniel Reyes. The employer was Halverson Logistics. The supervisor of record was a man named Gregory Vance. Switch took it to Preacher, the way you bring water to a man in a desert carefully, because he knew what it would mean. Preacher read the printout twice. Then he set it down on the scarred bar table of the clubhouse, a low cinder-block building on the edge of town, with neon in the window and Edison bulbs hanging from the rafters and the smell of old leather and coffee soaked into everything. He folded his big hands. The men around the table went quiet because they knew the stillness in him, and they knew what it meant. "The guard from the storm," Preacher said. "The same," said Switch. "He led us out of the rain." "Wah." Preacher's voice was very low, and this man fired him for it. Nobody answered. There was nothing to answer. Preacher sat for a long moment with the news, and the neon buzzed in the window, and somewhere a refrigerator hummed. Then he looked up, and his eyes had gone flat and patient. The look of a man who has decided something and will not be moved off it. "Find out everything," he said. "Not for a fight. We are not going to lay a hand on anyone. We are going to find out what kind of man Gregory Vance is, and then we are going to let everyone else find out, too." Switch, quietly. Legally, I wanted clean enough to hand a judge. This was the thing the world got wrong about the Iron Covenant, and the thing Vance would learn far too late. They did not deal in broken bones. They had learned over 4 decades and more than one funeral that the most permanent damage you can do to a powerful man is to take away the thing that makes him powerful, which is not his body. It is his reputation, his cover, the carefully maintained story he tells the people above him. Break a man's arm and you make a martyr and a lawsuit. Expose what a man has been hiding and you make him disappear from the only world he cares about. Preacher had buried friends who chose the first road. He had outlived every enemy he beat by the second. So they went to work, and they did it the slow way, the patient way, the way that leaves no marks. Switch started with the public record, because the public record is a confession that powerful men do not know they are writing. Gregory Vance's name appeared on corporate filings, on a homeowners association board in a gated development on the good side of town, on the membership roster of a country club with a waiting list. It also appeared, Switch found, on 2 previous wrongful termination complaints, at 2 previous companies, both filed by older workers, both quietly settled, both followed within months by Vance's promotion and transfer. The man cut the expensive employees, ones near retirement whose pensions were vesting, and he booked their salaries as savings, and he moved up before anyone connected the dots. Daniel Reyes was not an accident. Daniel Reyes was a method, but a pattern of legal settlements was not enough. Settlements are sealed. Settlements look, from the outside, like the cost of doing business. Switch needed the thing underneath, the thing that would make the people above Vance see him the way the people below him already did. And he found it, not through any hack, not through anything that would not survive a courtroom, but through the oldest method there is, which is that he asked people who already knew. Because the second thing the world got wrong about the Iron Covenant was the assumption that they were outsiders. They were not. They were the dock workers' uncles and the waitresses' fathers and the mechanics who fixed the foreman's truck. They moved through the working world like water through gravel, and the working world talked to them in a way it would never talk to a man in a suit. Switch spent 4 days drinking coffee in diners and standing in repair shop bays and leaning against loading docks. And the story of Gregory Vance assembled itself out of 100 small grievances, the way these stories always do. He did not carry a notebook where anyone could see it. He bought breakfast for men coming off the night shift at a chrome counter diner 2 blocks from the yard, and he let them talk the way tired men talk when someone finally seems to be listening. He stood in the open bay of a transmission shop and held a flashlight for a mechanic for an hour, and somewhere in that hour the mechanic mentioned, without being asked, the cousin who drove for Halverson and had not been paid right since the new boss came in. The story did not come all at once. It came in pieces, over refilled cups, and across the hoods of half-fixed trucks, and Switch fit the pieces together at night on the scarred clubhouse table while the others slept. There was a forklift operator at the Halverson yard named Reuben who had been hurt on a shift Vance ordered understaffed and who had been pressured to file the injury as off the clock, so it would not touch Vance's safety numbers. Switch found him in his kitchen on a Sunday, a big, slow-spoken man with a brace still on his wrist, and Reuben talked for a long time about the morning of the injury, and the meeting afterward, where a man in a clean suit had explained, gently, all the ways a complaint could go wrong for a man with a family. There was an office clerk named Priya who had seen Vance alter the timesheets of the night crew, shaving minutes off the clockouts of men who could not afford to fight it, hundreds of dollars a month vanishing into the man's bonus metrics. She met Switch in the parking lot of a grocery store, would not sit down, kept looking over her shoulder, and told him in a low, fast voice about the drive she had hidden in a coffee can in her pantry for 2 years. There was a vendor who had been told quietly that his contract depended on a kickback routed through a shell company with Vance's wife's maiden name on it. Each piece on its own was a rumor. Together, documented, sourced, dated, they were a noose. Switch did not pay anyone. He did not threaten anyone. He sat with people who had been wronged by the same man, and he listened, and he asked if they would be willing to say what they knew, if it would never come back on them. And one by one, because they trusted the patch in a way they had never trusted the law, they said. Reuben had kept his original injury report, the honest one, before he was made to rewrite it. Priya had photographed the altered timesheets, terrified, and kept them on a drive in a coffee can for 2 years, waiting for someone to ask. The vendor had bank records. The case built itself, because Vance, like all men who have never been caught, had grown careless, certain that the people beneath him were too frightened or too small to matter. While Switch built the file, Daniel knew none of it. He sat in his quiet house, and the savings dwindled and the letters from the bank grew less polite. On the 11th day after his firing, a man in a windbreaker knocked on his door and served him a notice. Gregory Vance had filed a complaint with the state, alleging that Daniel had, on the night of the storm, conspired to grant unauthorized access to known criminal associates, and was therefore ineligible for unemployment benefits and might, the notice implied, face further action. It was a lie wrapped in letterhead. It was the institutional bully reaching out to crush a man who had already been crushed, because that is what such men do when they sense weakness. They do not stop at enough. There is no enough. Daniel read the notice standing in his doorway, and for the first time since his wife died, he felt something he had thought he was done feeling, which was the cold certainty that the world was rigged, and that a man like him could not win it. He went inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He took the small square of leather out of his shirt pocket and set it down in the lamplight. And this time, when he looked at it, he did not see a debt he was too proud to call in. He saw the only door in a building with no other doors. He still did not know how to use it. There was no number, no address, only the stamped death's head and the words Iron Covenant. So he did the only thing he could think of. He drove the old roads on the edge of town until he found a low cinder-block building with neon in the window and a row of chrome machines lined up out front like a cavalry at rest. And he parked his sedan at the far edge of the lot, and he sat there for 20 minutes with his hands on the wheel and his heart going hard. Then he got out and he walked across the gravel toward a heavy steel door, and he felt, with every step, that he was crossing from one world into another, and might not be allowed back. The door was opened by the man called Switch before Daniel could knock, because Switch had watched him park, because Switch watched everything. And behind Switch, in the dim, warm glow of the Edison bulbs, the room turned to look. There were a dozen men, leather and ink and gray beards and hard hands, and for one suspended moment, Daniel felt the full weight of every story he had ever been told about men like these. And his knees nearly gave. Then a broad, gray-bearded shape rose from a chair at the head of the long, scarred table, and Preacher crossed the room, and he put one heavy hand on Daniel's shoulder. And the fear ran out of Daniel like water out of a tipped glass. "Brother," Preacher rumbled, "we have been wondering when you would come. Sit. You have had a hard month, and we have things to tell you." Daniel sat. Someone put a cup of coffee in his hands, hot and black, and Preacher pulled a chair around to face him, and he told Daniel what they had built, and the telling took the better part of an hour. Daniel listened with the coffee going cold in his grip. He learned that he was not the first. He learned about Reuben and the rewritten injury report, about Priya and the timesheets in the coffee can, about the vendor and the shell company with the maiden name. He learned that the favor he had done in the rain had not been the start of his debt to them. It had been the start of theirs to him. And he learned that the men around the table were not asking him to do anything except be willing to let the truth be told, and to put his own name on it beside the others, so that what happened next could never be called the work of an outlaw gang, but only the work of people who had finally been heard. "We do not break him," Preacher said. "We do not touch him. We give what we have to the people whose job it is supposed to be, and we make sure they cannot look away. And we stand close enough while they do it that no one mistakes you for a man who can be made to disappear." Quietly, Daniel set down the cold coffee. "Why?" he said. "Why do all this for one favor in the rain?" Preacher was quiet a moment. The neon buzzed. "Because nobody did it for us," he said finally. "When we were young and the law would not have us and the churches turned us out, and the decent people crossed the street, there was no warm lot in the rain. We built one for each other because no one would build it for us. And when a stranger builds it for us without being asked, we do not forget That is the whole of the code, brother. It is not complicated. People think it is about the bikes. It is about who shows up in the rain. The reckoning, when it came, was not a brawl. It was a Tuesday morning, and it happened in 3 places at once. And Gregory Vance did not see it coming because men like Vance never see it coming. The file switch had built, every document sourced and dated and notarized. Every witness willing to stand went to the State Labor Board, to the Corporate Ethics Office at Halberson's headquarters, and to a regional reporter who had been writing about wage theft in the logistics industry for 2 years. It went on the same morning, so that no single recipient could bury it before the others acted. And it went with Daniel Reyes's name at the top, not as a victim alone, but as the first of 9. The country club called Vance first, before the company even reached him, because the chairman of the ethics committee played golf with a man on the labor board. And word moves fastest among the people most afraid of scandal. Vance took the call in his glass-walled office with the door open, and the dock workers passing in the hallway watched his face change, watched the easy confidence drain out of it, and something pale come up underneath, and they did not look away the way they once would have. By noon, the membership was reviewing his standing. By 2, the Homeowners Association had received an anonymous packet, neat and complete, and the neighbors who had nodded to him at the mailboxes began to find reasons not to. By 4, the corporate office had placed him on administrative leave pending investigation, and the regional reporter had called the company's media line for comment. And the company's media line, hearing the words wage theft and falsified injury reports and a pattern across 3 facilities, had said the words that end careers. Vance called his own attorney that afternoon and was told, in the careful language attorneys use, that this was not a thing that could be made to go away, that there were 9 names and dated documents and a reporter already writing, and that the best thing he could do now was say nothing at all. Vance, who had spent his whole adult life inside the armor of institutions, watched the armor come off plate by plate over the course of a single day. The promotions had been the proof of his invulnerability. Now they were the trail. The reporter's story, when it ran that Friday, named the pattern, the older workers cut just before their pensions vested, the salaries booked as savings, the man who moved up and out before anyone connected the dots. It named the night of the storm. It named the guard, fired for letting travelers out of the lightning. It did not name the Iron Covenant, because the Iron Covenant had made sure their hands were nowhere on it. The work was clean enough to hand a judge, exactly as Preacher had asked. Daniel did not witness Vance's collapse in person, and he did not want to. He heard about it the way the whole town heard about it, in pieces over coffee. The story of a man who had carried himself like he owned the place, and who now could not get a call back. The lawsuits came, the real ones this time, filed by Reuben and Priya and the others with a labor attorney, who took the case on contingency, because it was the kind of case that makes a career. The shell company unraveled. The kickbacks surfaced. By the time the leaves turned, Gregory Vance had left the town for good, gone wherever such men go to start again under the assumption that no one there will know, and his expensive watch and his German sedan and his 2-space parking job went with him, and the working world he had treated like furniture watched him drive away into the flat, blinding light of a weekday morning and did not wave. But this story does not end with Vance, because Vance was never the point. The point was always the man in the rain. Halverson Logistics, scrambling to contain a scandal, reinstated Daniel Reyes within the week with back pay and a written apology, and, when their lawyers explained the optics, a quiet settlement that paid the medical debt out of its drawer and left enough besides that Daniel slept for the first time in 2 years. without the arithmetic of survival running behind his eyes. A regional vice president he had never met drove out to the yard to deliver the apology in person. A nervous man in a good coat who shook Daniel's hand too long and used the word regrettable 4 times. Daniel listened to all of it without much expression. He had stood in front of a man in an expensive suit before and learned what their words were worth. But the check was real, and the back pay was real, and when he opened the drawer at home that night and took out the stack of medical bills and saw the word paid stamped across the top of each one, he sat down at the kitchen table where his wife used to do the crossword and put his face in his hands for a while, not from grief this time, but from the strange, unbearable lightness of a weight that has finally been set down. He could have taken the money and gone back to the booth and the thermos and the low radio, and no one would have thought less of him. The booth was offered. The night shift was his again, if he wanted it. He went back to the clubhouse instead, on a clear, cold evening, to give back the square of leather. He had decided that a debt repaid should be returned, that the thing was theirs and had only ever been lent. He drove the old roads to the cinder-block building and parked his sedan and walked across the gravel. And this time the steel door opened before he reached it, and this time he was not afraid at all. He found Preacher at the head of the long table, and he set the leather square down on the scarred wood between them. "It's yours," Daniel said. "You paid what you owed me 10 times over. I came to give it back." Preacher looked at the little square of leather. He did not pick it up. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked at Daniel. And something moved in the seamed old face that was not quite a smile. "You misunderstand what that is," Preacher said. "That was never a debt, son. A debt gets paid, and it is finished. That is something else." He slid the leather back across the table, back toward Daniel with one thick finger. "That is a standing. You earned it in the rain, and nothing that happened after changes it. And you do not give it back any more than you give back your own name. You keep it. And the next time some poor soul stands in a flood, with nowhere to go, you remember which side of the fence you were on, and you do for them what you did. For us, that is how it gets paid, not back forward." Daniel stood there with the small square of leather in front of him and the warm glow of the Edison bulbs on the men around the table, and the radio in the corner playing something low and old, and the smell of leather and coffee, and the long road soaked into the walls. He understood finally that he had not been let into a place. He had been recognized as having always belonged to it, the way the patient man at the hospital bed had belonged to it, the way anyone belongs to it who will stand in the rain for a stranger and ask nothing back. He picked up the leather. He put it in his shirt pocket, behind nothing. Now, just over his heart, winter came on hard that year. The eastbound road flooded twice more, and twice more the barricades went up, and twice more there were travelers caught in the open, with nowhere to wait it out. And both times on the industrial edge of a town, the highway had mostly forgotten. The gate arm of the Halverson yard cycled open at an unscheduled hour, and a man in a cheap rain slicker stood in the lot and waved a flashlight toward the dry awnings at the back, and held the gate, and asked nothing. He logged it in the incident book every time in his careful hand, because he was a man who did things completely. But he did not look at the radar anymore before he decided he had stopped needing to. On the coldest night of that winter, long after the trucks had stopped running, Daniel sat in the warm booth with his thermos and his paperback, and the radio turned low, and he heard, before he saw, the sound he had learned to love. Engines, far off, climbing the on-ramp, a low, patient thunder rolling in out of the dark. He set down the book. He stepped out into the cold with his flashlight, and across the lit acreage he saw a long, disciplined line of headlights swing in through the gate he had already opened, chrome catching the sodium lamps, and at the front a broad, gray-bearded shape he would have known anywhere. Preacher rolled to a stop beside the booth and cut his engine, and in the sudden quiet he looked at the old guard standing there in the cold with his flashlight. And he did not say anything sentimental, because that was not the way. He just nodded once, slow, the way you nod at a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be. "Cold night," Preacher rumbled. "Coffee's hot," Daniel said. "Awnings are dry. You know the way." And the column rolled toward the back of the lot, and the man who had once stood alone and afraid in the rain stood now in the cold and was not alone, and the thing in his chest was not fear, and had not been for a long time. He held the gate. He counted them in. And when the last machine had passed and the engines had gone quiet under the dry awnings, he walked back to the warm booth, and he poured a second cup of coffee, and he carried it out across the lit and frozen acreage to where a row of weary travelers waited out the night, the way someone had once needed a place to wait, the way he would always make sure there was one. If this story warmed something in you tonight, if it reminded you that the smallest decency offered to a stranger can come back around in ways you never see coming, then stay a moment, leave a word below, and carry it with you into the next cold night when someone needs a dry place to stand. There is always someone out in the rain. Be the one who opens the gate